Today we have spent a lot of time on the macro view of farmland. For the rest of the afternoon, we're really going to try to focus in on regional and then specific farms and farmers and let you get to know more about the assets themselves. So this group of gentlemen represent different areas in the country for us. We have Midwest, Delta, and then Skye gets the joy of being all of the West, which is challenge because it's pretty big. But what I'd like to do to start is have you all give a little bit of context for what you're looking for, what you do, but then also your particular region. So primary crops grown, and then maybe the average size of a farm for your region, and then a large size of a farm. So we have some context of what's average and then what's really big. So Kirk, we start?
Yeah, so I focus on the Midwest, primarily the Western Corn Belt, more specifically Iowa, Illinois, southern Minnesota, a little bit of Nebraska and the Dakotas. So corn, soybean. Summit actually has an operating farm that farms about 14,000 acres alongside of our investment group. When we look, the average size farmer in that region that we work with is small size, about 400 acres. We work with tenants that farm as much as 30,000 acres. So vastly different. I'd say on average, it's probably varies in the 1,500 to 2,000 acres range. And as far as transaction size, the average transaction size is about 160 acres, roughly $2 million. How
about you, Gwin?
Before I get started on that, I was going to make an announcement mainly to the staff of AcreTrader that the biggest deal in the history of AcreTrader closed about 15, AcrePro closed about 15, 20 minutes ago, and the money's been wired. All right. And we couldn't have done it without all the help that they gave us. So I'm in the mostly the Mississippi, Arkansas, and the Missouri Boot Heel. I live in Memphis, Tennessee, and I've probably done 3 transactions there in 36 years. And we do some in North Louisiana. And the average farm size probably throughout that whole, it's a little smaller in Missouri, but I would say this is farm operation, not actual land, but it's probably about 4,000 acres for the operator size. There's quite a few in the 10,000 to 20,000 acre range, and then we've got one 60,000 acre farmer and a couple of 30 and 40,000 acre farmers.
All right, well, so the context of how to tackle the West and make comments about the West, I guess I'll silo it in the context of row crops and permanent crops. There's over 200 crops grown in the states that I work in, so you certainly have your variety of what you want to pick. But in general, we're talking about farm sizes and deal sizes and things along those lines. I'll give you just a quick anecdotal story. I was on a vineyard in Napa Valley about a week ago, and it was 72 acres and a $37 million deal. 72 acres. And the guy tells me, oh, don't be, which is roughly over 400,000 an acre, more or less, and which is double in my 15-year career. It's doubled in value from 200,000 an acre. And the response was, oh, well, it's 10 million an acre in Bordeaux. And it's like, okay, wow. All the way to dealing with dryland wheat, where it's $1,000 an acre, and the deal sizes are $1 million. So yeah, a lot of variety depending on what specific thing we want to talk about.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to start us off with where we've had a lot of questions, which is around water. Some areas of the country want to get water on, some want to get water off, some are concerned about where the water is going to come from. I think it'd be interesting to hear each of you talk about where the water comes from, but then also what the primary challenge with dealing with water is in your area. Kirk, you want to start?
Yeah, so I guess in the Midwest, we've got, in all the regions that we invest in, we've got adequate rainfall. So our biggest challenge is getting the water off, and that's ponding water. So through the use of drainage tile, farms with adequate outlets, depending on the soil.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
What is drainage tile? You might want to tell them that. There are a bunch of folks who won't know.
Yeah, so it's perforated plastic tile that's put underground. So as water soaks into the soil, it's able to find veins to get off of the surface, put underground, and then carried through that drainage tile into an outlet. So that outlet typically can be, a larger county main, which is a larger county or drainage tile, or a creek or some other type of outlet. But different soil types have different permeability based on their makeup. So there's depressional soils that hold water far better than others. And so you really don't want the crop to be soaked in water for over 24 hours or 24 hours. So the key is when there's excessive rainfall, is getting that off the crop and underground and away from the farm. So it is a blessing to have adequate rainfall, but it also presents its unique challenges as well.
In the Mississippi Delta, when I say Mississippi Delta, I don't mean Mississippi, I mean the Mississippi River Delta. Water on is not, getting water on is not a challenge. Getting water off, drainage is and land leveling are the most important things that we do. We have an abundance of water and we have no restrictions on it. We can pump it. Is about all we want. They're starting to restrict and monitor the water in certain states, and they're probably going to get more and more ticky about that. But right now, it's all drainage issues that we have, and we have a Arkansas and Mississippi are not number 49 and 50, as y'all all know, and the tax base and the ability to keep the drainage systems and clean them out and keep them maintained is very difficult, and that's just something we have to deal with, because we can get our farms drained, but we've got to have the public to get the rest of the water off. So that's something that we deal with all the time.
So basically for that, you're pumping the water off the fields, but then it has to find a place to get to, which in this case is the Mississippi River. And we have this big levee that keeps the river from flooding all of the farms. And so we have pumping stations that basically take that water and get it back into the Mississippi, since we've already created this way to keep the Mississippi off the fields.
That's correct. The Mississippi causes problems, but it makes the entire Mississippi Delta agriculture. It drops the soil in there, it brings the fertilizer there, it takes the grain away, it replenishes the aquifer. It is what makes the Mississippi Delta so productive.
Thank you. Skye?
Well, folks, we could spend all afternoon talking about water in the West, but in general, no secret to anybody here probably, but Mother Nature doesn't give us a lot of rainfall in most areas in the West. Certainly we get snowpack, but we're getting our water via irrigation, groundwater, surface water. And in certain areas in the West right now, it's an absolute crisis mode. In parts of California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, it's worse than southern Colorado. It's worse than it's ever been, at least in the time period that I've been in the game for 15 years. But even really in my lifetime of 40, it's pretty unprecedented, and some things need to improve and change along those lines to make it sustainable for the future. When you consider water management in the West specifically. But there are other areas that are endowed with an amazing resource of water. When you consider places like the Columbia River, the Snake River, it's massive water sources that are feeding millions of acres that would otherwise just be desert.
So I think what I'm hearing from this, is just kind of, this is a small lens into a bigger problem, is you need to know what you're doing and you need to understand how to underwrite various regions, subregions, and farms in particular. I'd be interested to hear you just talk a little bit about how you think about buying farms for yourself, your fund, whatever the case may be. How do you think about underwriting in your own personal business?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say that the whole presentation before here is really the antithesis of what we do in the Midwest with finding value. So it's a very fractured market. So when we talk about diligence, and a big part of it is sourcing farms. And the example I give is Iowa's got 950 communities. For a brokerage community to cover that area, they need a tremendous amount of expertise on the local market. So the way the market's set up today is half of the sales are estate sales. You have a tremendous amount of retired farmers that make up probably a quarter of the sales. Very few existing farmers other than trades, and then even smaller investors. So, we're having to do our own due diligence before the auctions ourselves, and that's why what these guys are doing is great, because it is needed. And certainly we benefit from it not being existent today, because we make investments by casting a wide net. But to your earlier point is everything that they have through their diligence is essentially what we're doing to look for the important things. In the Midwest, since we have rainfall, it's how do you make money on a farm? It's the productivity, it's the crop prices. So we're looking for soils. We've got the best soils in the world, so we want to make sure that the farms that we're looking at in those specific regions are well suited to grow the most productive crop because the water's there. And on top of that, it uses the soil maps, everything that's outlined, as well as local knowledge on the farmland to source that farm.
How about you, Gwin?
It's fairly consistent throughout the region where I work that when you're out looking for farmland, you're out looking for precision level to grade irrigated farmland. That is in the appraisals that you get. That's the Class A and B lands. They are the easiest to farm. They're the most efficient to farm. The soils, they play an important role, but 25 years ago, your soils played a lot more important role. But once we got the laser technology that we could level all our fields on a precision level basis, and they just look like from the air miles and miles of square blocks. And if you're not doing that, you probably are not farming that kind of land. You're probably behind. We do look at the soils. The location's important. That's important from a tenant's perspective. There's areas that don't have as many good tenants, and so location is really important. But the Delta used to be covered with center pivots, and they tear them as soon as somebody buys that's progressive. They're going to tear that down. Even if it's almost brand new, they might sell it, but they're going to turn it to precision level land that you can row irrigate. You can grow cotton, rice, soybeans, corn, peanuts, sweet potatoes, whatever you grow down there. That's what the kind of land you want, because when you precision level it, you create the row irrigation, but you also, that's when you put in all the drainage pipes and clean out all your ditches. It's a turnkey ready to go. Garrett's father, Murray out there, probably agree with me. People will call you and ask you, what kind of farm you got? Is it fixed? That's what it is. It's fixed. Everybody knows what fixed means.
So just to, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I want to ask more, just because we may have some folks out here who may not have seen some of this. Precision level basically means we're taking it to a mostly flat state in order to row irrigate and to give optionality, is what Gwin said. But Gwin, can you describe what row irrigation is, because a lot of these folks just won't have seen it.
Yeah, and row irrigation was revolutionized, in the 90s. Prior to the 90s, we had gated pipe that you laid on the high end of the field, and you'd hook it to the irrigation well, and it had holes the width of the rows, and you had to have crews and crews of people to help move all that stuff around. And so you couldn't farm a whole lot of land and manage that irrigation without a whole lot of people. And in the 90s, they came out with something called polypipe. I don't know where else they have it, but they have it all. Everybody has it. And it's a thick plastic type pipe that they roll out. It comes rolled up in a big roll, and they roll it out, hook it up to the irrigation well. It will fill up with water, and then they have these little devices. They go and punch a hole in it, every other row or every row, and the water runs, gravity flows down the road to the tail ditch that you've constructed in the end to get the water out of there. That's where you lose your most crop, is in the ends where it kind of settles. So, then when you're through irrigating, that pipe just flattens back down, and 2 weeks later, if it's super dry, you do it again. And then at the end of the year, you roll that stuff up, and it's hauled somewhere to be disposed of and recycled. I'm not disposed of, recycled. And trying to think of anything else that associated with that, but you can also grow rice on that. And rice, you put a levee every 100 feet, and the water paddies up, and you can just manage the water. So it just enables you to grow at least 2 more crops than you can grow in the Midwest.
Thank you. On rice, one of my favorite facts, we always see rice in paddies, which just means it's flooded, right? And you're used to seeing these pictures. That's called an anaerobic environment. I always feel very smart when I say that. But the reason you do that is actually for weed control rather than because the rice actually needs that much water. So it's kind of a fun cocktail party fact. Skye, will you tell us a little bit about your underwriting?
Yeah, no, it's water's number one, certainly, and then because we're not as uniform, I would say, as the Midwest or even the Delta. In my experiences with those areas, I'd say number 2 often is tenant operator. But then we get to a location discussion, and a lot of the stuff that to the microclimates, to the micro scenarios, you hear a lot of, well, it's too rocky for potatoes, or it's too sloped for strawberries, or it's in a cold spot for apples. So you get to a lot of those kind of environmental, it can't grow up in this valley because there's too much hail, and you can't have cherries where a place where there's going to be hail, and so you have a lot of that kind of a dynamic that a lot of weather. We get into growing degree units, and we really analyze a lot of data. I would say quite a bit more, and we don't have some of the uniformity, so we have to get very specific on. There'll be deals that I'm involved with, especially some large scale deals where we'll ask for a 120-day due diligence period so that we can install weather, monitors. And if they don't have weather monitors already, so we can gather data. Some people in advance of selling large assets like that, they will start collecting that type of data because they know that it's going to be needed in a more of a, I guess, sophisticated environment of it's that important for people wanting to transition. So, and then another big thing that I would add to an underwriting in my region is infrastructure. So we have it all the way from, dry land like they would be in I call the Midwest dry land because Mother Nature's giving you the rain. It doesn't have irrigation infrastructure, but the condition of the infrastructure, not only on-farm infrastructure, irrigation systems, the wells, the pivots, center pivot irrigation systems, to the condition of canals, all of that type of thing, too. The off-farm infrastructure, when you have it's a big consideration in some areas in the West when you might have a 5,000 acre hay farm, but it's 3 hours away from any dairy. And so, that's a consideration when you're thinking about transportation costs and labor and some of those types of things. So, and then maybe the last comment that I would make about an underwriting on a lot of deals that I do in the West are labor is a big factor. So it's one thing to be, trying to find, it's hard to find labor everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're the McDonald's down the street or if you're a Midwest row crop farmer or if you're an apple orchardist in Washington. But I will say that it takes a lot more bodies to pick fruits and vegetables as a general statement than it does to farm a lot of the row crops in the Midwest. And so as a result of that, we are heavily involved in H2A and just different labor issues in order to do what we have to do. And so that's a big consideration to an underwriting on a lot of deals that I'm involved with is labor.
Perfect. All right, well, y'all all prompted one thing through an answer at different points to several questions, which is, what makes a good farmer in your region? And, I guess there are two ways to define a good farmer. One is just someone who can be a profitable businessman, but the other is, a good partner on the land that you're associated with, buying, selling, whatever it may be.
I think you said it when you refer to a partner. The lease is essentially the partnership agreement. So it's important to do your due diligence on your tenant in person and with their bankers and other landlords to make sure that they are who they say they are. Fortunately, a lot of us have been in this business long enough that you know the lay of the land, you know the tenants, and if you don't know them directly, you know somebody that knows them. But it is very important for people because, I guess the analogy that I've given people over time is, if you own a retail center, what business do you want as the anchor? Do you want a Walmart or do you want a Kmart? And you want to make sure that it's set up as a partner that's going to make your investment as well as their operation successful. And, that is, a lot of it's constructed through that lease agreement and the mechanisms you have to make sure that they're honoring, both the fertility through soil testing, and the amount of fertility that they're putting on the ground, but also that they're good people and that your goals are aligned and that you're going to be successful together.
I've been doing this a long time, and what I really like is about a good tenant, I think, is incredibly enthusiastic about what he does and how he makes his living, and out there gung-ho all the time trying to do better. The ones that are how Daddy used to do it, those kind of, those kind of get you down. But those guys that are out curious, looking for other ways to do it, trying different things, those guys they seem to always come out on top. Even if in a bad year, they're enthusiastic and they're trying to get it done. Of course, we own a mortgage company in addition to a brokerage company, and so I'm an underwriter originally, and money management, knowing your cost. That is the worst thing we have in our region. We have a lot of older farmers who are much more interested in making a crop and being out on the farm and doing those things. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't have someone else or someone taking care of the books and the business and getting that done. They just kind of wait till it rains kind of guys, and those are they don't seem to do as well. And I'm trying to think of anything else that really makes a good tenant. That's pretty much trying new technology. Those kind of guys.
Something, I'm just going to add something here for both of these guys, and maybe some for you too, Skye. I find it so interesting how these folks can, you mentioned cost. People have to be really nailed down on cost because their revenues can shift fairly dramatically. you're thinking about, all right, well, even if you hold at 200 bushel corn, the market can hand you two wildly different prices. I mean, going from 290 a bushel last year in May to like almost 690 this year, that is a wild profitability swing. And so you have to always be thinking about your cost to be able to do well in the years when you're handed a good market and manage through the bad markets that you're handed as well. It's a really fascinating business. What do you think about
Like
that, Skye?
fertilizer prices going up 150%?
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to what the others have shared in terms of in my region make a good tenant is it doesn't. There are good tenants of all sizes in terms of operation, and when I think kind of at my core what I think makes a good tenant, it's they maybe a few one-liners. They treat the farm as if it was their own. Which ironically, in my career, I would say definitely over half, if not crowding 70% even, of transactions that I have done have been sale leasebacks. So it was theirs, and they polish it up and sell it, to an institutional or to some, other family, and then they keep farming it, either themselves or next generation. So treating the farm as if it's their own. Actually, in our region, with the exception of permanent crops and some and pasture land, the whole carbon thing for us, pretty hard to do because we are, with 200 plus crops, we're turning the ground. You have to be able to grow onions, and then the next year potatoes, and then the next year sugar beets. You can't do that without tilling. And so it just doesn't work, and same with strawberries and many of the other types of commodities. And so there are other ways for them to be sustainable in terms of their water usage. It's what Gwin mentioned on the innovation, the technology, their desire to push that stuff. To me, put new sprinkler packages on their center pivot systems that use 50% the water and still yield you the same amount of crop. Those types of things, the people that are the tenants that think like that, are the ones that grow, and you'll find it's comical to me as and somewhat having spent about a decade working for a fund and now working for myself on behalf of funds and kind of more of a consulting role. It's humorous to me that the really good farmers are tenants of all of the institutional investors. So I just helped AcreTrader buy a farm, and this particular farmer that's on that farm I could list off 6 or 7 other institutional investors that he is also a tenant for because he's a good farmer, and so they all want to be partners with him, and it's a great business model for them as tenants if they take it serious. Last quick thing, succession plan. That's a big one for us, especially with some of these bigger farmers, so that they've got that organized and. That's a scary thing when you're an institutional investor.
Thanks. Meb asked me a really hard question, so I'm going to ask a hard question, but also make it a little bit easier and ask you an easier question paired with it, which is, if you look out and you say, my book of investments or the deals that I've done, and you're looking back 10 years from now, what are you going to think about the things that have gone wildly right, and then how do you mitigate against the risk of things having gone wrong?
10 years from now, I look back?
Yeah, sure. In the future.
So
I'm probably going to wish that I would have bought
How do you
more.
mitigate risk, and what are your chances for upside, or what happens right that gives you wild upside?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, I think the important part for land in general, and specifically the Midwest, is that ultimately, the value in these operations accrues back to the land. And so, all this innovation that's coming, is going to affect land values in a positive way. And whether it's making it more liquid so there's more demand, whether solar becomes a big part, which, in some solar leases, you can get upwards of $2,000 an acre. in additional revenue. Carbon's a huge thing. Ethanol's huge. Renewables, biofuels is going to be a big thing. So all these things are very positive. But then you look at like Summit has a carbon pipeline, and you know what people will learn through this is being able to quantify that carbon that goes into the pipeline is going to make liquid fuels carbon neutral, which improves the story against electric vehicles, right? So also helps ethanol, helps the Midwest. That value eventually or ultimately accrues to the land. And those things are positive. I know in the past there's been discussions about carbon payments on a more governed basis being upwards of $100 an acre. It's all supplemental income. It all comes back to the land. And so I think ultimately, what I'm excited about most is that holding that asset is only going to accrue more and more value as all this innovation occurs. So, I mean, if it's a cop-out, it's a cop-out, but I think my biggest regret would be not buying more 10 years from now, hopefully.
That was a great pitch, thank you. This is such a cool point, and I just want to underscore it. How does the value go back to the land? Essentially what happens is, because the land is more productive and because the people are able to make more money on it, they're willing to then pay more rent or purchase land at a higher price because they can make more money with that land. And so ultimately, when more profitability enters into the system, it goes to the limited resource, which in most cases is the land itself. And it's a really incredible point about why investing in land and specifically farmland really excites our team at the very least, and folks up here. Gwin?
That's tough. 90% probably of our acreage in the areas I work in are the commodity crops. It was 99% probably 10 years ago. I believe there's certain areas, a few years ago they came in and Texas was having trouble producing enough peanuts because of the drought, consistent droughts. They came and invested in Mississippi and Arkansas millions of dollars in peanut infrastructure. Potatoes, people were having troubles in other potato regions. I don't know where they were. Big potato. So we've always had a pretty good size sweet potato in Mississippi and Arkansas, a pretty big industry, but now they've put in some facilities. They've put in facilities to process green beans. I'm just thinking that I'm bragging because we got the water, and we're going to have the water for a long time. And maybe it's like the guy said here earlier, I've been hearing that since I was a little boy, that it's going away. Well, I have too, but it seems more drastic. It's going away other places. So I think we're going to look back in 10 years and say, man, this sure is a lot more melons than it was. The chickens have, the poultry industry, it's huge up this way. But over in eastern Arkansas and Mississippi, it's exploded. And we're having a lot more success in drawing in different crops, different processors, and I believe the big wins for us are going to be where some of the big losses are for other people that need water and are running out. This is just a little story. About 15 years ago, a guy came from New Mexico and just started buying up all the cotton land around. And I went to lunch with him, and I said, well, why are you coming here from New Mexico? He said, the way we treat land in New Mexico is when it runs out of water, we're through with it. It's like a paper plate. We throw it away, and y'all treat it like good china. And that's why I came here. So,
I like that. Skye?
Yeah, so I think on the On the upside side, I just look back 10 years instead of looking forward. I think looking forward, I talk about risk, but talking about upside, looking back 10 years or 20 years, what do I wish I would have done 10 years ago or 20 years ago? So I think fundamentally, the thing for me that never changes is you need to don't forget where you came from in terms of the fundamental investments. If you buy a quality asset, it's going to be successful for you. There'll be ups and downs, different market cycles. I have a slightly different perspective than these guys because of the different crops, and so I've had some big wins in my career. That maybe in a cocky moment I would say, we timed it right. That we knew what we were doing. But truthfully, generally speaking, the commodity, actually getting the right commodity in the right spot at the right time, in the right density and all that kind of stuff, it's just luck. I mean, it really is. But having a quality asset to be able to do that over the long run, I think is the real selling point. A couple of sound bites about that. We were in a position, I've been in a position a couple of times in my career to plant permanent crops at a time where it was kind of a head scratcher. Like, this is maybe really risky to do. And I have had both happen to me, where 7 years later, we're pulling out a $50,000 an acre investment because we screwed up. And, or the inverse being, we're the first ones to have Cosmic Crisp apples to bring to the market, and we're making $1,500 a bin, and in 1 year pay back the whole investment. So you've seen it go both ways, but that's the cycle of the risk and looking back. So when I look forward 10 years at things I want to make sure I don't make big mistakes on, I would say that with the ever-changing dynamic, and the drought thing could change in the West. It has before, but if it doesn't change, my advice to myself would be you can't pay too much for ground with good water in the West. You just can't. You will not pay too much. So it's going to have value because of the climate and the water profile. And that's, I think, a really, it's an aggressive comment maybe, but it's really important to think, to keep that in perspective when, and I understand I have a variety of biases probably in making that comment, but that's a really important perspective, I think, to keep when there is so much competition for land everywhere, frankly. But in my world, there's so much competition for land that people are passing on deals over, a return hurdle that's, our return hurdle's got to be, 3.8%, and this is going to be a 3.72. Buy it. Like this, don't worry about that, because you're buying a quality asset in an area where water is becoming even more pronounced important. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Skye. I want to underscore your point too. I'm just here to make y'all look better, but I think it's really interesting thinking about his water comment, because people ask, is California going away? The reality is that California can grow things that almost nowhere else in the U.S. can grow. And there are unique climates and unique aspects of the geography and topography of that part of our country that are truly unique and incredible. And people are not going to stop eating almonds, for instance.
I wish we could kick all the people out.
But I think there are compelling reasons to think about investing in these areas, because while the resources and the places you might want to invest, if you can get the right ones, there could be really positive trends if you have the right ones, and the wrong ones are all going away. Because I don't see us stopping eating things like almonds or U.S. grown strawberries or whatever the case may be.
That's right. No, I would agree with you. So, one of the graphs earlier talked about how permanent crops as a percentage of farmland is like less than 1%, and that's it's an interesting dynamic. Generally, permanent crops, with the exception of wine grapes, permanent crops usually take more water than row crops. Most do. Some don't, but and wine grapes would be the exception to that. But it's in the permanent crop world, you really do have to start thinking about how you can maximize the geography with the water profile. And we're truly going to see, and my prediction is, we're going to see in places like the Central Valley of California, where there is still lots of row crops that are grown there. That stuff is going to start pushing north, is my prediction, towards the Columbia Basin, towards, better water areas, so that you can have that climate for the permanent crops.
All right. I have a long list of questions that we're not going to get to because I want to open it up to y'all. Clearly, we have three really brilliant people here. I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about different regions and for y'all to get some questions in.
You guys kind of touched on this, but I'm trying to better understand how you can lose money in farmland. Can you either go through personal examples or things that you've heard of where people ended up making mistakes?
I'm sure we could all give you good examples. I'll give you a couple quick ones, both on value and operations. But you can pay, despite what I just told you a minute ago, you actually can pay too much for farmland. It does happen. So, but an important part of the comment I made earlier is you can't pay too much for the best farmland. You can pay too much for junk farms, and people do that, and they get burned. And I've seen it happen. Usually, they hold on to it until they can sell it for what they paid for it. And so that's usually what we normally see. It's pretty rare, honestly, to see farmland actually trade for below what it was bought. But somebody might have to hold on to it for 15 years to make up the difference. And then on the operations side, in my world, it's, for example, on a block of old galas, I was just looking at my phone earlier today. I think this year, on this particular block, it costs us about $13,000 an acre to farm that ground, and our revenue is going to be like $5,500 an acre. So, and we're talking like 500 acres. So, do the math. 500 acres losing $7,000 an acre. That's a big hit in 1 year. Just lost right off the top. Happens all the time.
In my area, farmers can lose money many different ways. Most of the farmers that consistently lose money shouldn't be farming. They should have never been farming. And but if you don't do your due diligence and you buy a farm that's not a quality farm or in a quality area, you can lose money. I started in this business in 1986. There was a lot of ways to lose money then. But to lose money on farmland, you had to kind of be pretty stupid because it's gone up since 87. In our area, it started back up, it bottomed in 87. And if you were investing in farmland, you've just made money since 1987. I mean, there's a few that hadn't, but we all think we're smart. We're just had good timing.
What does a bad farm look like? You mentioned bad farms.
Most of the bad farms in our area, I think most of them have been taken out of production. The CRP program and the WRP program have taken, I would say, 95% of the bad farms out of production. But a bad farm is a non-irrigated farm with timber or trees scattered around the property in the low wetland areas. You can't irrigate it. It's usually a heavier soil. It's heavier. The lower soils are heavier soils, and that's why there are trees in those areas, because that's the lowest spot in that area. That's mostly the bad farms. There's a few close to the Mississippi River. You can have sand farms. They're just too sandy. There's a handful of spots in Arkansas where they have salt in the water, the salinity's too high, and then there's another handful of farms in Arkansas that are about the only farms in our area that don't have good quality water. I know there's a lot of people in here from other places that don't know about the cost of irrigation water, but you can put an irrigation well in that'll pump 2,000 gallons a minute for $20,000, and it'll water. It was $20,000. I don't think it is anymore. So you can pump.
Context on that, Skye?
Yeah, well, before that, I was going to make one comment about my, losing money in apples. I do want to add a little bit of color that, like that block that I just highlighted where you're losing 7,000 an acre, that's a 25-year-old Gala planting that has very low coloring apples, and so it's it's non-desirable anymore. And so in part, it's the lack of the management on the part of the owners to pull it out and put something new in. So for the $7,000 per acre losses, you're going to have, we'll have $20,000 an acre gains on other blocks this year as well. So it's the risk mitigation and how do you, play that in the mix of the capital as well. So I just wanted to make that comment. Sorry, not related to the water, but I just got to thinking about how you're not losing 7,000 an acre in all apple orchards. This is that was a dog.
How much would a comparable well be in, I don't know, pick your place?
So how deep?
120 feet.
Oh, yeah.
120 feet.
And I'd give my right arm for a 120-foot well.
Static water about 60 feet,
even
In the
better.
wintertime, it's about 10 feet below.
And how many gallons a minute?
2,500.
Jeez.
Wow.
That's good. Yeah, so that well, that exact well would probably cost $200,000 in the West to do, but normally, like I did a well project about a year ago on a farm that the well, the drilling, the pump, everything kind of soup to nuts once it was all done was $947,000 for one well, and to get about 2,000 gallons a minute. So, but it's cost of business in some parts of the West.
Skye, that same ranch 25 years ago, those galas were selling for $35 and $40 a box too, right? Is it
Oh
right?
yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
they've done quite well. They should have probably transplanted into some other varieties a few years ago anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, no, there was a time they were, and so his translation at 25 to, or $35 to $40 a box back 25 years ago. 25 years ago, labor costs were, exponentially cheaper than they are today, not to mention everything else. When I first started in my career, you could grow an acre of apples for $3,500 an acre, and if it was a good planting, you were making $10,000 to $12,000 an acre in revenue. So, and we're talking on ground that was appraising for maybe $20,000 an acre. So year in, year out, you're getting a 50% net income return. I mean, it was, running through probably a 6-7 year window. It was awesome. But, and then we've had some dog days now because everybody came in and planted apple trees and we haven't gotten some of the old color out. But, and this gentleman that just asked the question too, he's in the strawberry business. That's like going to the casino sometimes. I mean, it's, sometimes you can do really good.
When I fly back to California tonight, I'd like to leave with a feeling that, this is almost like a Republican and a Democratic type. California's out there and we're sitting out there and we're going to survive. We've been preparing for the drought for 40 to 50 years. You understand?
That's right.
The water issue in California started when a metropolitan water district bought all the water from Northern California. So we started politics 50 years ago. There's
That's
movies
right.
about it, right? So the water situation really in strawberries and a lot of the other specialty crops in California has really come down to us planning 30 years ago to go to drip irrigation as opposed to furrow irrigation, right?
That's right.
So, we're very efficient in the strawberry industry, and grapes and table fruit have all gone to new growing techniques that utilize water. And so as long as we have the Sierra Nevadas there and we have the coastal mountains, I think we're going to be okay with water. Next few years will be tough, but we've been through this before.
That's right. No, he's right. That's what we hope.
Hi, I had a question about, so there's been some discussion about how costs at the farm level play a huge role in, with how they're tracking it, having a good tenant. I'm curious if crop insurance ever enters this discussion. So in the Delta, for example, crop insurance has been on the rise in the past 10 years, but typically it has higher premiums than other places, and so there's been lower adoption rates. In the current Farm Bill discussions, they're talking about introducing carbon credit premiums reductions for crop insurance. They're also talking about introducing specialty crop insurance. Do you see that changing sort of the risk analysis you're doing in the underwriting? Does that play a role at all in your decision-making? Or is that just sort of left to the tenant?
I'll take a quick run at that. So the answer is yes. The more, so it's already, crop insurance is already in a lot of specialty crops, but they would introduce some more, which would be great. But yeah, it's much less subsidized in the specialty crops currently as it sits. But with some of those crops, it would be absolutely amazing to have some of those carbon credit offsets and some of those types of things to lower the premiums. Yeah, we'd be very happy about all of that most of that kind of stuff in the West. It's just a general overview comment. It would, yeah. It would be a positive, yeah. A more robust crop insurance program specifically for specialty crops would be an accretive thing to a financial model in particularly the permanent crop space.
Crop insurance is prevalent throughout the region that I work in. More so in the smaller, less well-capitalized operations, or the super large operations. A lot of the extremely highly capitalized have minimal crop insurance, and but it would be pretty devastating to our area if they gutted the crop insurance system. In my underwriting, I guess it would change. I don't consider it. Out of my mortgage business, a lot of the people we sell our mortgages to are from, they're out of Chicago or somewhere in the Midwest, and they are beating us on the head wanting to know everything we can tell them about the crop insurance, and we just tell them we don't consider it because we really don't like to lend to people that have a lot of crop insurance claims, or we have what we call, I don't know, they may have them in other parts of the company, we call them insurance farmers. And they drag things down. That's what they do. But they compete heavily because they can pay higher rents. But in the end, you're going to get you're going to get back when you have to go fix your farm up with the next tenant. You're going to get back what you thought you had gained. You're going to lose it, and maybe even have to pay more. I've heard of many people have to come in and clean up their farms after those guys come in. They're kind of looked down upon a lot in our area.
For context on that, those are people who center their profitability around getting payments off of government subsidized insurance, and they kind of set up their cost structure so that they can maximize profits around doing that. It's rare, but people know who these tenants are, and most people who invest professionally try to avoid working with them for all the reasons that Gwin spelled out.
I guess in short, I mean, there's nothing new for me. It's so prevalent in the Midwest to have crop insurance and so inexpensive that I guess, we would underwrite it differently if somebody weren't to take that approach, unless, they had a high enough net worth that they could self-insure.
I do think we need to wrap up. Zoe's given me the hand signal. These folks are resources for us. They represent us really well. We're very proud to be partners with all of you. Thank you for being here. I would encourage you, if you have conversations with these folks or anyone else out here who is in the underwriting business or related to farming in general, ask some of these questions. Ask how, ask why, as often as you can, because this is why we're excited to be here, is to have these conversations. And if you're a farming person out there, I encourage you also to ask how and why to some of these investors. We want these kind of conversations to happen throughout the rest of the day, and we're really excited about the next one as well.